Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Don Marsh. There is no denying the enormous influence that African American musicians have had in this country's music at all levels. However, black musicians are conspicuous by their absence from the world of classical music, at least big parts of it. Less than 2% of American symphonic orchestra musicians are African American. Terrence Patterson is trying to change that. He's the founder and artistic director of Ritz Chamber Players, a Florida-based all-African American ensemble formed in 2002. Its mission is to change the way American audiences view minorities in classical music. He joins me in studio, as do musicians harpist Ann Hobson Pilot, a member of the Ritz, and is the first African-American principal player in a U.S. symphony orchestra. The first. She played in the Boston Symphony for 40 years. Flutist Amara McGill is a leading soloist and has appeared with major American symphony orchestras. Thank you all so much for being with us. It's great to see you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
We're looking forward to what's going to be happening later this week. We'll talk about that in a minute. But Terrence, let me start with you. Why this gap that I just mentioned? What is going on to cause this?
I think it's basically cultural. I think that our communities have not been exposed as much as we would like. You know, when you think of being a classical musician, it starts so early, and the fundamentals are so it's important when you start and how you progress. So I think that the exposure is really important at this stage.
But music and the African American community are almost synonymous. When one looks at the history of this country, you would think that there would be a greater participation.
Definitely. I mean, we're excelling in a lot of parts of it, and of course we're talking to musicians that also excel in classical music. So it's just another genre that we're trying to be a part of, I think. But yeah, we're right. I think we excel in it generally, and just looking to expand it all.
And let me turn to you because you've been at this for a while.
Quite a while.
Tell me something about how it got started for you. And I'm sure you were sort of lonely there from time to time when you were playing, weren't you?
I was, really. I graduated from the Cleveland Institute of Music in 1966 and immediately was hired by the Washington National Symphony as the first harpist. And I was the only African American in the orchestra the 3 years that I was there. And so that was my first professional job, and that was when I was the first principal player in 1966.
How many African Americans were there with you at that time?
Well, in Washington, there were none. Mm-hmm. I was the only one. And in 1969, Arthur Fiedler came to guest conduct, and he called me into his room and said he liked my playing and wanted me to audition for Boston. I would have been principal player in the Boston Pops and second in the BSO. So I did go to Boston to audition, and I won the job. So I became the assistant principal principal player in 1969, and then was moved up to principal harp with the BSO in 1980. Again, all during that time, I was the only African American until maybe in the 90s when Owen Young joined as a cellist. And then there were two of us, and then when I retired in 2009, Owen is still the only African-American player in the BSO.
What about your life and about your growing up and about your early days put you in the position to be where you were for all those years?
Well, my mother was a concert pianist, and so I heard music in the home, classical music in the home, from the time I was born. And I played piano from the time I was 6 years old and studied with her some. But I didn't like the piano that much and didn't practice very much. So she stopped my lessons at one point, and I went to the school. I went to a very good school in Philly that had every orchestral instrument available. And the music teacher at the schools said, why don't you take up the harp? It's very similar in reading, treble and bass clef. So that's how I got started, and I loved the harp from the first day.
And the harp is just as easy as the piano to take from place to place, right?
Right.
Yeah. Terrence, that Anne really makes your point, doesn't she, about early exposure, and that's what one of the key differences would be.
I think so. Early education, and I mean, I think some of our musicians did get exposed to the public school, but yeah, some did come through great parents like Anne's.
Yeah. Damari, what's your story in this context?
Well, I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and my parents are very creative people, and they exposed me and my brother, who now is the principal clarinetist of the New York Philharmonic. Exposed both of us to a wide variety of genres of visual art, dance, and once again, it's just a question of exposure, and I was fortunate enough to be exposed at an early age.
Do you see this demographic changing in the classical music world at all?
Well, I see it changing slowly, but I would say slowly but surely. I notice when I travel to different schools, different conservatories of music, that I do see more people of color studying, and that is the precursor to actually seeing, I believe, more people that look like me in professional environments, and even the fact that you can just imagine, and I've seen this already. I know that when I'm on stage, if there is a young boy, a young girl that is that looks like me, that happens to maybe want to play the flute, and they see me, it's a reason for them to be even more inspired to take it up, because I'm familiar to them.
Terrence, what sort of changes have you seen as a result of what you've been doing for the last 15, 16 years with Ritz?
Just like Damari said, we are quite conscious that when we see young people, they are hopefully inspired. Generally, I felt inspired sometimes with the ensemble visiting my school and going to see the orchestra. I'll tell you a quick story that just happened for us. We were in Birmingham a few years ago, and we were doing a master class with the students, and this beautiful girl came on, African American senior, and she was just playing beautifully, and we just, our violinist at the time, Kelly, just fell in love with her, and we just spent all this time with her. And we were just talking with her about her growth and where she wanted to do and what have you. And at that point, she was like, she had all the tools, but she didn't have the confidence that she could really, go to the next level, to the schools that she was thinking about weren't, any major conservatories or anything. But last week, I was in Detroit playing in a professional setting, and from that point, she had grown, and she was in the orchestra with us. And I was taking photos with her because I was just proud of that moment, because at that moment when we met her, she continued to have Skype conversations and lessons with members of the Ritz Chamber Players, and staying in contact to help her, gain the confidence, continue to grow. And so I was really excited to see that parallel of starting, and now she has grown to where she's in a professional setting. So I think it is changing. Like Damari said, we are seeing more young people being identified and seeing the possibilities.
But, Anne, they're still not winding up in symphonic orchestras. 1.8%, I think, of the membership nationwide is African American.
Exactly.
But one does get the impression that smaller ensembles, such as the Ritz, for instance, is attracting more. Am I correct in that assessment?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And one of the problems is, as I said, I joined my first orchestra in 1966, the Washington National, and that was a result of the previous harpist having injured her hand and was not able to play. And so I was highly recommended, and I was brought in to fill her chair for initially 1 year, and then they liked my playing, so they signed me for a full-time contract. And when I left in '69 and auditioned for Boston, it was behind a screen, and the screen had just been used. But before it was a system of the conductor might ask his friends from Europe, "Oh, I've got an opening for flute. Come take the job," And so eventually it became, the players in the orchestra became aware that it needed to be a more fair system of getting players in order to diversify.
So
they
it's an anonymous audition. You do not
anonymous-
see the performer.
Exactly, and it's the committee is made up of members of the orchestra, and that is what is going on until this day. And I think it is very difficult for anyone to get a job, no matter what color you are. And part of it also is, let's say if you're a string player, if you're behind a screen and you're playing a very valuable instrument, you can hear that from behind the screen. And if you have an instrument that is not quite as good, you start off, not in a fair sense anyway. So there's a lot that goes into it.
Damar, does that work for you, that system?
You mean having the screen
Yeah.
up? I think I think it does. I mean, it has over the years. It's been important, even though we're not seeing so many numbers. But it's been important definitely for women, for sure, over the years. And I think it's a very important component.
Is there a gap, a gender gap?
Hardly anymore.
That's what I was going to say. I'm not aware of seeing it around here.
I
That's
think
a-
really
But
thanks
you're
to
European, I mean, like Vienna and Berlin for a long time, right?
Right, but
I
they
think that
don't
they've
use the
stopped.
screen or anything.
Right.
When I joined the BSO in '69, I was the fourth woman hired. Now, I mean, I've lost count. There may be 40 women in the BSO now.
So you had two strikes against you, as it were. As I,
Yeah.
Right.
You must be pretty good at it.
Hopefully.
Well, I'm sure you are. That's the word that's being passed around anyway, that's for sure. Let's listen to a little of your music, if we may. We'll give folks a taste of what they're going to be hearing later this week. Do you want to pick out something for us, Terrence, that we can hear that is kind of representative of what you do?
Well, since we're talking with Anne, why don't we play her doing the Saint-Saëns Fantasy? If you would talk more about this fantastic work which she's been doing with Kyle Lombard, who is here in St. Louis and teaches at the university. Fantastic violinist, and I'll let Anne set up the piece itself.
It's a wonderful work that really showcases the harp. I mean, it's actually, I think of it more as a violin solo with harp accompaniment, but it has all of the wonderful French flair that French composers are known with, glissandos, and it's just a beautiful work. And the recording that you have, I performed it with Ty Murray, and Kyle and I will be playing it on Friday.
Okay. Well, let's have a listen to that. Unfortunately, we won't be able to hear all of it, but it will certainly give us a taste of what to expect on Friday.
Great.
is such a pretty instrument.
Gorgeous.
It's lovely. Yeah, it really is.
Especially the way she plays it. Huh?
Yeah, that's for sure. I wish we could hear it all, but again, this is going to happen on Friday night. You're performing that as well. That's going to be at 7:30 at the 560 Music Center. What are your audiences like, Terrence? What sort of a racial composition do you normally attract?
Well, we've been attracting probably 30% Black audience, which is, of course, our mission to do, of bringing in our community into the hall. So we have worked hard on that. So we try to get with our organizations like the Links, 100 Black Men, so they are aware of us because they also have programs in the community, and expand beyond that, where a lot of their programs, where they have educational programs for children themselves, they would also help bring other kids. So so we are building. Of course, we would like to get even more than 30%, but I think it's a start for us, certainly.
One of the things you're doing, as I understand it, is that you charge no admission to get people into the hall.
Right. We don't want any barriers to keep you from coming in and enjoying this fantastic art form. I enjoy it so much. I think everybody should be able to be a part of it.
Well, here's an over-the-top suggestion.
Okay.
Why don't you start a symphony orchestra?
Oh, yes. All right. You got your checkbook? I think it would be
the check
great.
is in the mail.
I mean, something, actually, there are organizations that are attempting to do that. Of course, I mean, it's quite the effort. I would say that I was in Detroit, the Sphinx Symphony Orchestra, which it plays for the competition. I don't know if you know, it's a competition for Black and Latino string players that's doing a fantastic job of identifying these young players, of course, and they bring in professionals, Black professionals and Latinos to make up an orchestra. Another colleague of ours, Amadi Hummings, is working on the Harlem Symphony Orchestra. He's been at that effort as well. So I think they heard you. Yeah. So there's some effort. I mean, right now for our organization, we are going through some planning, and maybe that's the next phase for us to think about down the line as we're planning out some things for our future.
It just seems to me, some of the outside looking into the kind of work that you do, that it would be a wonderful way to really attract a lot of attention, attract a lot of musicians, and do what you're doing on a somewhat larger scale.
Yeah, that's true. And I failed to mention also the fantastic Gateways Music Festival that is housed at the Eastman School of Music. It's every 2 years we get together, but that orchestra is all Black, and they may be expanding to maybe yearly. That organization, and maybe from the yearly we become quarterly, maybe we'll become monthly, maybe it'll just grow. So I think there are some things in the works where people are combining resources together with all of our organizations to get to that point.
That is really good to hear. Damari, let me turn back to you as time begins to wind down. What advice do you have to young Black musicians to advance to where you are, or to try to?
Well, one really important thing to do is, if you're fortunate enough to be exposed to something that you love, to really work harder than everyone at it. Literally everyone, not just everyone in your community, but I think it pays to try to really be the best, and in this day and age, it's not that difficult to actually ascertain like the international level. Just go online, go on YouTube. If you want to study the oboe, you can listen to oboists from all over the world, and you're never too young to begin your effort in being better than that great oboist that you're listening to online. That right there will at least allow you to begin to be as the best that you could possibly be.
There's the exposure part of what we were talking about earlier. And what advice do you have?
Well, if obviously practice, of course, yes, and what Damari said is, makes a lot of sense. When I was coming along, there was no YouTube or anything like that, so it's wonderful to have the opportunity to use those tools that are now available to people and to kids.
Well, one final thought from you, if you would, Terrence. Tell us in 30 seconds about your program on Friday.
It's going to be a fantastic program. It's varied and a lot of fantastic music. Like you're just going to hear the Mozart Flute Quartet with Damari. The song that you just heard, some parts of that. And we're doing works by one of our black composer in residence we had at the Rich Chamber Players. His name was Corey Taylor Perkinson. And it was actually the last work. He was writing a full work for the Chamber Players, and he unfortunately passed before doing it, but he finished an incredible, beautiful fragment of a work that I think people are going to just enjoy tremendously.
If I might just say, because time's getting away, that's at 7:30 Friday at the 560 Music Center.
Right.
Terrence Patterson, Damari McGill, and Ann Hudson-Pilot, thank you so much. I'm sure you have a wonderful performance on Friday night. Thank you for
We'll
being
see you
with us.
there.
Thank you.
Hope we get some young African-American people interested in music through all of this and your classical music.
Thank you.
Archived versions of past St. Louis On the Air programs available for download or podcast at stlpublicradio.org/STL On Air. St. Louis On the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU. Thank you for listening. I'm Don Marsh.
Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.